Because of title deeds and that story, many uneducated, miseducated, undereducated people get cheated every single day out of land, out of property, out of their money. We speak about things like legal contracts that no one reads. Whether you're getting a banking loan, whether you've just gotten married, brilliant divorce lawyer that sits on Soft White Underbelly and on other podcasts speaking about the marriage contract is one of the most life-changing contracts that people enter into, but they don't even know what it is that they're signing. An employment contract, what it binds you to. Some people buy homes and they don't know what house they're buying and what problems it has. Then you have terms like voetstoots. Take it as it is. Today we speak about the Consumer Protection Act, CPA. We speak about, what's this privacy? Poppy Act. Pieces of paper. And these pieces of paper contain our minds to a point where sometimes a violent person, a muscular person, gets dominated by a weak, small person because of a piece of paper. And you respect someone because on paper it's written, this is Dr. Whoever. On a piece of paper it's written, this is President Whoever. Newspapers sell propaganda and story. History books, if you've ever read my favorite book, 1984 by George Orwell, sell propaganda and a perception of the truth. We speak of, imagine if the lion could tell its tale instead of the hunter. The hunter always gets to tell the tale. The victor gets to dictate what history is, whether it's true or not. Even today, in recent history, you get told that people like Jacob Zuma are criminals. And some people are like, he's not. Robert Mugabe was a dictator and a tyrant. And other people say, no, he liberated us and gave us land. People say Donald Trump is crazy. And other people say he's a great leader. People say Vladimir Putin is a bloodthirsty dictator. And others say, no, he's a liberator for his people. In real time. In 100 years, 500 years, the person who is in power at the time gets to dictate whether Nelson Mandela was a sellout to the black majority or whether Nelson Mandela was a liberator of his people. You cannot trust history books. You cannot trust the media, newspapers, and the news. I'll go in so far as to say you cannot even trust your own memory. Sometimes you look at photos of your childhood and you're like, I don't even remember where I was and what I was doing. Imagine if someone else was to tell you, I know exactly where you were and what you were doing. And they tell such a convincing story that you believe it. Until someone else tells you that's not true at all. You weren't there and you were not doing that. There's a concept called the Mandela effect, which speaks about what you thought was true and whether it's not anymore. In a South African context, I'll speak about a clothing store that is called Markham. No, but it's called Markham's. Are you sure? It's always been called Markham. No, but it was called Markham's. Some people debate whether the man on the Monopoly board game, does he wear a monocle or not? The Mandela effect comes at a time when they say the real Mandela passed away in prison and a fake Mandela came out after. And there are many examples of some of these. Speaking about propaganda language and a lot of the propaganda that's peddled today is that white people in South Africa own 80% of the land. No one goes to read the data, the stats that's out there, whether real or not, but it's there. 80% of land in South Africa is owned by white people. I have to give a shout out to Wandile Sihlobo. He's an agricultural economist. He's one of the guests I'm hoping to host on the Penuel show. And some of the other people that have sat to crunch the numbers, look at the data and speak on some of these issues and write articles and do interviews. Many people never want to listen to this. I'm making this video for this point number 7. I said I've got 8 points. Point number 7 is the reason I'm making today's video. What is the land situation like in South Africa currently? Gave you philosophical, land doesn't belong to anyone. Told you about empires and historic land wars. Told you about some of the scramble for Africa and the colonial borders. Spoken about some of our wars over land and territory in South Africa. spoke about the 1913 Native Lands Act, the Bantu Land Act, apartheid, British rule, the ANC government. But when we speak about land and we complain, at least in a South African context, where are we? 80% of the land is owned by white people. Who told you that and where does it come from? I'm here for point number 7. When I take a step back, the 1913 Lands Act wanted black people to be on 10% of the land. They got to 7%. 23 years later, they fought and it got to 13% of the land, which would leave 87% of the land in white hands at the time. South Africa conducted a land audit in 2017. It is available on the internet. You can Google the South African Land Audit 2017. There needs to be an update, of course, and there are many other people who can do their own research on land. Very, very importantly. One of the myths is that white people own 80% of the land. Where do I want to start? Let me see. I gave you that number. I'm going to give you a number that normally trends on Twitter. It's a screenshot of a graph that was shown on the news at some point, which the EFF and other black voices have used to speak about the land issue in South Africa. This graph shows that 72% of land in South Africa is owned by white people, 72%, and only 3% is owned by black people. That graph that normally trends, it's got different colors if you've ever seen it, is actually only about farmland. And it's only about 37 million hectares of farmland. It's not about the whole country, but it's used as propaganda.